Right. Do you want to back it up a little?
That's fine. I'm fine.
Which one? Vicky? The last one, please. بشير كيف هلا كويس؟
You can look for yourself if you want. Just think.
You're ready.
Pretty.
So just before we get started, if anyone, as we're going through this, if you want to speak up and have a question based on what we're talking about, please do. Make it more interactive.
Welcome everyone.
Hi.
Although we can't see it. You may shift here.
Yeah, it might be better to shift down this way. It's up to you.
So let's start. Hello everyone. It's the HR&E chat and we are live on Periscope and Facebook as well. Today is a very interesting topic for almost every professional around the world. It's not dedicated only for Dubai. It's all about training in this tough economy. And we're joined today, as usual, by my co-host, Brad, the Executive Director of Sherm Mia, and myself, Anas Al-Mari, the Director of Training at Focus Social Academy. Today's topic is Brad's suggestion. Thank you, Brad, for the suggestion. And we've got a lineup of questions that we would like you to interact with us. And we've got also a good crowd here showing up at the Focus Social Academy studios. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks.
So it's going to be interactive. Any question you may have in your mind, just raise your hand. And if you would like to be in the camera, you can also be on the camera while asking or answering. So let's start.
Yeah, training is a hot topic. I don't think it'll ever go away. The way I was thinking about starting this, I've been in HR long enough to remember, I won't mention when, but back in the day, it used to be that people would send people on training as punishment. You
Good start, Brad.
I know. If someone said, I'm going on training, someone else would say, what did you do wrong? How are we trying to fix you? And,
Is it?
Yeah. And so it's nice to, several years later, that wherever I go in the world, training is seen as one of the most important attributes of work. In other words,
some people leave the country, the company because
absolutely, in terms of opportunity, in terms of demographics, it skews towards a younger demographic. The younger you are, the more you look at your work and the opportunity for training as a benefit of the employer. And the older you get, the less people seem to emphasize that benefit. It's just demographics. So the topic again is training programs, and this actually came to me from someone a few weeks ago, and it wasn't specific to training, but it was specific to challenging economic times. How does that change the work environment? And so putting it in the context of training, you do training, I do training. This is, if you will, a sense of our business, our mission. And so how do you, in terms of training in more challenging economic times, how do you justify the training investment? Because, one of the most famous things that happens when economics goes through its business cycle is that HR, training, recruiting, these are one of the first areas that get cut in terms of budget and resources.
And this is what's happening nowadays.
It is happening. I see it, I'm sure you see it, and yet intrinsically we know that that's wrong. You know, intrinsically we know that it's wrong. It's kind of, it happens. It's kind of like the person who tries to lose weight by starving themselves. You know, you may lose some weight, but you change your metabolism in the process, and your health goes down. So it's a short-term gain for long-term problems. So the first question that we prepared, and kind of backing into it, is why should either people or employees invest in training and development? We're not talking about the organization right now. The person themselves, the employee, why should they invest in training? How do you answer that?
It's an interesting question, Brad. I would say that the moment you stop learning, you're dead. It's as simple as that. It's a very well known, and like, you know, there's so many people think that once they graduate that I know everything and I own the world and that's it. And some people after a master's degree or MBA or any qualification, they think, well, this is it, and I'm not really interested anymore in training. And there is, like, you know, the CEO of our group, Mr. Ammar, always reminds every attendee that on their graduation, while we are cutting the cake, that he tells them that today your training has started.
It's the beginning.
Yeah, it's the beginning.
Nice.
Absolutely.
I like
so
that.
on the last day, he reminds every group that, guys, remember that today is where the day that you're training, the real, the very hands-on training started. So this is basically, I believe, the essence of the training.
Well, like what you said, you know, and at the very beginning, you know, and I'll paraphrase it, you know, it's kind of like if you're not growing, you're dying. Yeah, and it's the beginning, not the end. Again, that too is a really good starting point, because unfortunately I think the educational system in the past was so based on acquiring credentials, acquiring a diploma, a degree, and then you just sort of cruise for the rest of your career, your life, what have you. That world is gone. That world doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know that it was ever good in the first place. You know, that people would earn a degree in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and then they did nothing else but work, you know, however work was defined for them. So, again, if you're not growing, you're dying. And I think from the employer's point of view, it's equally important that you grow. You know, what is an employer? You know, what is an organization? It's not a building, it's not desks, it's not computers. It's the people in the organization. So the only way that an organization actually grows is if the people grow. Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Any thoughts from our audience here on Periscope or on Facebook, or probably here? Any thoughts, guys? Can we ask what is your industry, please?
I work in the events sector.
Events and
Airlines.
airlines.
Well, I'm actually looking for a job right now,
Okay.
but I used to work for oil and gas. Oil and gas, yeah.
Oil and gas, and the gentleman.
I'm doing a master's in marketing. Masters in marketing.
Marketing.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
big diversity, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, so, you know, and my last point on this first question is it relates to what we said, if you're not growing, you're dying. It's like that expression from evolution, in the sense that it's not survival of the strongest or survival of the fittest, it's those who adapt. And human beings have never lived in a time that it is changing more frequently. I'm sure it'll change more frequently in the future, but what I'm saying is that what happened in the past, where people, you know, my father, he spent the last 30 years of his career for the same organization. I don't know
That's
any...
Japanese style.
No, it's just old school. It's just the way it used to be. You know, that you'd work for a career in one organization. And that model doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean that you take for granted your employer or your employees in either direction. But there's no guarantees. And you, as the employee, have to make sure that you're marketable. You have to make sure that you have skills and competencies that are relevant to the marketplace. And if you don't do that, you know, you're putting a lot of risk in terms of your marketability.
Interesting. Thank you.
How about this one, Anas? You know, in terms of in terms of the training itself, you know, and I've seen this, and maybe you've seen this before. Someone says, "Well, my employer's not going to pay for this." So the question, I've framed it a slightly different way, whose responsibility is it to pay for training?
Well, it depends, right? Like, it depends what sort of training, what is the urgency, what is the need for this training, is it like, crucial for the growth of the business or not? So there's so many criteria, it depends on the company itself and on their policy of learning and development, if they have that department. But I would say, I would recall back 8 years ago, and I wanted to attend the training, and my manager said, look, you have to be patient till we run our own training. And I didn't listen to him, and I just went invested in $500, and I paid for the training and I went for it. I have learned something new, and though I acquired it later on from the experience itself and from the other training, but I never regret any training that I went and I paid, even if I haven't the ROI was not that much, but I still I would invest in training.
There's some consistency on our feeds here on the different Periscope, saying that you the individual are responsible for paying for that. But does it change based on if it's work-related training? If it's something that your employer is saying, something that you should do, does that change the burden of who should be financing it?
Well, it depends, like what I mentioned. I don't want to just rephrase it, but it depends. It depends. What do you think?
Well, in some countries, if it's a legal requirement, or let me rephrase that, if it's a job requirement to have a certain training, sometimes in the law it will say the employer must pay for that training, whatever that training is. Maybe it's first aid training or something like that. That's legally mandated. So in many jurisdictions, that's where they sort of draw the line. If it's something that you have to do for your job, in other words, you could be disciplined for not either having the skill or not doing the training, then the employer must pay for that. And I think that's a fair distinction. If it's something that's specific to you, and there's kind of a spectrum, isn't there? Specific to the job and specific to you. If I'm studying, if I'm working in human resources and I'm taking a course in Mandarin Chinese in Dubai, that's very personal. It's hard to make the argument that that's something that my employer will benefit from, certainly not in the short term. So in terms of that spectrum, if it's required for the job, the employer has more responsibility. If it's something that's very personal, then you should pay for it. And then in the middle, maybe there's an opportunity to negotiate. I know some of the organizations we work with here in the Middle East, they will do things like offer the employee, look, if you take the course, maybe it's a SHRM course, and you're successful in passing our certification exams, we will pay for the course. But if you're not successful, we've supported you for the training, but you would have to reimburse or pay for maybe 50% of the cost. Something like that, a bit of cost sharing. And I really like that from the point of view of sharing the risk too, showing the responsibility. Because people learning it's not something that you can push on to people. They have to be willing to do it too, and when you're putting some, that expression, have some skin in the game. When you personally have some investment in the training, you're more likely to put a higher level of effort into that training.
Sometimes, especially here in Dubai, because we receive so many nationalities and people from other countries, there are people just traveling to Dubai for the sake of traveling, not for the sake of training.
Right.
And you know those people from the first day when they ask you when do you finish, and what is the timing and when is the break. So all their concern is everything but not the training itself. And you need to question as a training or learning and development manager at the company, you need to question and really send out the people who are like what you said. And you may question, even if the company is willing to pay completely and fund it, ask them, would you pay 20% of the training or 50% of the training? If they say yes, then they are the people, most likely to be the people who deserve to be sent out for the training.
Well, I do like the 50-50 split, and I've seen this over the years. Many years ago, I worked for an organization that actually paid for their future leaders to go on executive MBA programs, and that, for an Ivy League school, a global school, that can be extremely expensive, especially in terms of the amount of time. That's not even a full MBA. And so they were, as they would say, burned several times by people who took this, and then they left right after. And so they started to introduce policies that said,
Yeah.
if we pay for it, you have to stay for a certain period of time,
Yes.
which is fair to a certain degree, as long as that period of time is reasonable. And then the second one that they've sort of settled on is this 50-50 split. Is okay, we're not going to give you 100% for this type of investment, because you will have the opportunity to benefit from that life.
We're going to
And-
subsidize.
yeah, we'll subsidize it 50-50, and you're demonstrating your investment in this as well.
Interesting.
How do you, when in your training area of expertise, not specific to your expertise, but when you have to convince people of the value of training, and maybe it's even decision makers, how do you do that? What is your strategy? What are some of your successful tips that you use to, if you will, business development training?
Well, that's our secret.
The secret sauce. But in the age of social media,
This is how we sell it.
yeah, yeah.
No, but there are, it depends on the situation of the company.
Mhm.
So if the company, their social media, we train on social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of our expertise, an area of expertise is social media. So we look at their profile, and the profile can't lie. You can tell that whether this company really in a bad need for a training, or they are okay but they need certain improvements. So you tell them, look, this is your situation, this is what your competitors are doing, and you can be, by this training, you will end up doing 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very logical stuff, and it's not like other training where you need to really keep an eye on the person. While social media, it's obvious, tweet in front of me and I can tell you where, how good or bad you are, or let's rephrase it, say how good or how much training do you need to be a professional in social media.
There's a lot of metrics in social media, isn't
Yeah,
there?
there is.
Comments? Question? Yeah.
Now, I have a question regarding that. In these times when you have disruptive innovation, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, if you take the automobile industry, when it started, for example, for the combustion engines, but now because of the innovation, there's no limit to which you can train your employees.
Mm.
So how do you say to which limit you could go for a training? Because you may be training them for being more efficient combustion engines. Now if you have something, a totally different industry that comes in on different technology, so your training goes in vain in regards to
So
that.
if I hear what you're saying is that you're saying that you could be in training forever, given
Yeah.
how much things change
And
today.
even if you're doing some training, there may be some other innovation happening, and then at that moment your training wouldn't be of any use.
Yeah.
So to what extent you would say that we should be spending to training, or it's good for us?
What are your initial thoughts on this?
Well, whether are you asking in general, or there's a certain case?
In general.
In general, I would say in general, again, the easiest answer is it depends. I would say if the company has a plan, and has a strategy and a policy for learning and development, then they do it, right? And like what Brad mentioned at the beginning, now because of the financial crisis, most of the companies, especially in the government, they are cutting millions of the budget for the training. So it's the easiest thing to start, to cut and to downsize right from there. So there's no limit for
Yeah,
it.
I mean, it's very true. It's an empty. It's kind of like anyone in this room overpaid. The ceiling is there's no ceiling in terms of how much you'd accept for your work. But in general, what should be done is that you break the type of training into one of two broad categories. Either it's technical skills or specific skills, or it's sort of the broader skill set of the competency of being able to learn. Right, and they're very different. So technical skills would be, I send you on a course to learn how to use a new software, a new application, a new technology itself. Whereas more general learning, which is often left to the university environments typically, that is teaching you how to learn. So you really have to define your need first as an organization. And better organizations are really good at this. And the great organizations, they become learning organizations. They teach themselves. So that's one of the goals that any organization should aspire to be, is reach a stage where you're such the expert in your own organization's mission, vision, and values and market that you become the university that trains yourself, and then you create the, and there's organizations here that do that, and there's some that are aspiring to do that. They have academies. They often try and market these academies to sometimes even their competitors as a way of developing a return on investment for developing in-house learning capabilities. So it's hard to answer your question with a specific. I've given you, and Anas has given you kind of a general step, but certainly the resources to invest in training decrease when you're in more challenging economic times. The better organizations never stop training because it's the fuel to your growth. It's like, if I want to, this may be an extreme example, but if someone wants to lose weight, you could lose a body part. That's losing weight, but that's not what you want to do. Yet a lot of organizations do that. They do things in spite of themselves. Good question. Good question. I would just add, and before we move on, this question is this, and you talked about it too, and the logic of it. I would add that this idea of building a business case, so make an argument based on facts, based on potential return on investment, and that structured argument, because especially in HR, we're very bad at sort of making an emotional pleas to do things. You should do this because it's the right thing to do. But better HR people, more professional HR people are able to say, this is the right thing to do in this context because here are the consequences. And sometimes the consequences are positive, an increase in retention, a lowering in cost, a competency development that wasn't previously existing. And sometimes it's just cost savings. You do something in-house because if you do it out of the organization, it may actually even cost you more. Recruiting is a really good example of that. So building that business case is a really important part of justifying training in any times, but especially in challenging economic times.
So if I can just add, you gave an example on the automobile sector. Sorry. Now, keep in mind, since you're in marketing as well, if a company changes their training every other day because there's a new innovation, it means that it's lacking a mission statement or a vision, right? So they have to, as a corporate, anyways, I come from the corporate and I've always experienced the corporate, they have a vision and a mission, and then the strategy is defined for each department in order to identify what is required, what is missing, what are the gaps, and how they can do it better, especially in the UAE. Why? Because it's a new country, right? So they're developing, they've got the capital, but they want to develop and reach a certain level that international companies in other countries have already reached. In the case of automobile, take the example of the hybrid cars. Up until this day, it's a new innovation, but they cannot train because the product itself is not as mature as they would like it to be. Once that product is out in the market and starts representing a definite challenge to the other products out there, then the right training, the right everything will happen, the learning and development, in order for companies that want to enter that niche sector, ensure that they enter it in strength and not in weakness. So it really depends. There is no limit to innovation, but companies are restrained in the sense of strategically whether they would enter that new market or not, and then how to enter it correctly without shooting. Exactly. So that's one important thing.
Thank you for this.
You're welcome.
So we have someone joined us from Texas. Good morning.
Texas. What time must it be in Texas right now?
So I have a question for you, Brian. Recently, I have a chat with someone I know. He's a kind of friend, and he said, "Anas, I'm a master trainer, and I hope he's watching. Anas, I'm a master trainer. I can train on anything. You just need to give me a couple of days, and then I can train on that topic." And I say, because you're my friend, don't tell this to anyone, because they are going to disqualify you immediately. Pick a niche, pick something that you are super good at and train. Start from there, and then build your portfolio around your technical or core competency. And he was stubborn, and he said, "No, you haven't came across a master trainer." I said, "Well, it's the 21st century and it's the death of generalists, and you cannot do that." You have to be focused on a certain niche.
I'll start by saying I agree with you. But I understand both sides of the argument, because just because you're a technical expert doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great trainer. But just because you're a great trainer doesn't mean that you earn the credibility with people who are trying to acquire technical skills. So there's two sides of this. But you know what he's saying is kind of reminds me of this quote from this Nobel Prize-winning poet, Maya Angelou. She said that people don't remember what you tell them; they remember how you make them feel. So to be a good trainer, he's saying I can make people feel like they had a great training experience. But we're saying, as you know, you're an engineer, I'm HR. We want to see the evidence that the training added value. It's not just about how much you enjoyed the experience, like a restaurant or something like that. And so there's both sides, because we are looking for trainers all the time, and we see people who have wonderful technical skills, but they can't engage a group of students. And hopefully that's something they can develop. But to simply say in this day and age, I'm a great trainer because I'm engaging, I'm entertaining, and I make people feel good is, and we'll talk about this shortly, is in Kirkpatrick's levels of assessing the investment in training, it's level 1 out of 4. It's the lowest level of return on investment in training.
So thank you very much, Larry. I couldn't agree more. And I've been invited a couple of weeks ago to a training in Bahrain on the ROI for training. And remember, I've sent you an invitation. And this is something that I'm really interested to go and opt for. Like, I need to, you have to have a calculation on the ROI of for your training, so we can also convince our, this is one of the business case. And you need also to show your client or the trainees or the delegate that if you get this, and now you can count yourself as a successful delegate. If not, you need to probably redo the training, or you can there will be some justification. And here is also, I would like to mention two things. First one is, I came across a training in the UAE called Action Coach, and it was the first ever training that I paid for, and they said, look, so far if you're not learning, get your money back. And he was challenging, and you probably know him, Wasim al-Kirkabi from Action Coach, and so he said, I challenge you, if you're not learning, stand up and say, I'm not learning, get your money back. And I like the idea, and since that day, all our training that I deliver myself, I say it's money back guarantee. Come and sit for 1 hour or 2 hours. If you don't like what you are hearing, and you see this is not going to add any value, get refunded. And Mr. Ammar is sitting here also, and I would like to quote him. And at the end of each training, he tells he can assess the delegates, and I saw him twice, that tells the people you can come and redo the training for free.
I like that model better. I think from experience, where there's a money back guarantee, sometimes someone's going to be opportunistic and say, just give me my money back. They entered it with the idea that I'm going to get 2 for 1 or 2 for nothing. And what I've seen,
we have a backup plan, right, for that kind of people.
Okay. But I've seen sort of the standardization of this policy for training organizations, where they say, if you didn't feel that this was successful for you the first time, we will let you retake some elements of the training. Of course, it depends on the type of training, because sometimes that may not make sense, but I think that's more like the 50-50 model I was explaining before, where an organization pays half, you pay half, and then you've got some skin in the game towards investing in that training, and yet the organization should benefit at the same time. So,
on the same page, like we get sometimes, and it's a real cases here we are discussing. What would you respond to people if they tell you, Brad, we would love to opt in for HR, any of your certification, but you have to allow us for a couple of hours to see what you deliver and how you train. Would you accept that?
Oh, absolutely. A sampler, absolutely. I think that makes all the sense, in the world, is let people sort of have a taster, some initial experience, get a sense of the trainer, Some of our partners do that, and I think it's good business.
So you think it's fair
Absolutely.
to ask, I want to try before I buy it?
Yeah. As long as there's one of our partners, for example, their standard course has 20 classes, and they allow anyone to come to the first class. The first class, just come, sit in. If you like it, if you don't like it, no obligations, no strings attached. I think that's a good model.
Yeah, and this is what I meant by money back guarantee. Like if the training is 6 hours,
Yeah.
so you can sit for the first hour, and then
Yeah.
if you keep sitting, which means that you are enjoying the training, or if not, you can leave and get your money back.
Yeah.
This is how we do it.
I think that's a respectful, mature way to do it. Yeah.
Back to your questions.
What's been the best example that you've ever seen of a successful training program? I might even ask some of the people here, in terms of training, maybe even it's been a job that you've held and you've had training that was so good that just you said, wow, that was valuable. Would you like to?
Well, I work in it's not as a, we don't train for technical skills, but what we do is we train the part-timers. So we create a whole kind of team building training, and we teach them the skills of how to speak with the guests and all that. But for us, we like to make it fun because the kind of people we work with are not at the, they're part-timers.
Yeah.
So it's not at the professional level so much.
So you work in the events, right?
Events industry, yes.
Yeah.
So when we train them, we create a whole model of where they're going to be working, the venue itself, what they need to know, how to deal with the guests, their actual roles, and then do some kind of like a role play exercise, and then team building activities. So it depends really. I mean, it should be motivational to some extent, but it should also contain all the core information that they need to know. And that should be presented to them in a way that they could easily understand it and remember it as well. So it's also the way you give the training.
Interesting. Anyone would like to add more to that? Bikit? So Mr. Bikit, he has been an intern at Focus Social Academy, and now you're facing the camera. So tell us, what do you think of the training that you are having at Focus Social Academy?
It's time to speak. Say it.
Actually, the training, I think it should be more practical with the application of some exercises. Even if you give the examples, it's very good. And in this Focus Academy, I think the best thing is the Mr. Anas just hadn't given us just a theories, but he taught us like try and just actions. And what else? I think it depends on the person, and even if the trainees aspire to be like the person who is training and wants to follow his or her path, I think it's a good way.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting point that Bikit mentioned, which is two things. It has to be practical, and the second one, the trainer should walk the talk, right?
Yeah.
So what he's saying, Bikit, is part of their training is to have a hands-on experience on how to network and build their network. So instead of just tell the interns on how to network, I took them to a networking events where they have to, and I left them alone. Like, I sometimes join them and sometimes I leave them alone on how to build their network, on how to even ask, like what kind of questions you ask. There are like, basket of questions, and you should pick based on the person in front of you. You have to, like, to be fully aware of their body language and, like, how chatty they are, or are they welcoming your question or not, and then you can build. And here's an interesting point when it comes to networking I would like to give, because we are talking about training, is you have always to offer the other side, how can I help you? And once you mention this magic question, look at the other person facial expression and see, like, you know, they are stunned, like, you know, or I rarely hear this question, like, you know, how can I help you? And I tell them, be genuine. If you are offering in help and certain, and you might tell them, I can help you with 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like Hassan's saying on Facebook, you know, it all begins with understanding the needs,
Yeah,
the value,
absolutely.
and that's the listening. That's asking the questions before you start pushing things. I know, you know, an example I heard of, and I literally heard of it, so I can't speak from experience. I was driving to Abu Dhabi a few weeks ago, and the radio was profiling the Emirates doing training, and they literally were role-playing in, you know, in a fixed sort of simulator of the crew, of the cabin of the airplane, and they were simulating going from Dubai to Doha and back, and they simulated everything, you know, for
Yeah,
the
they do.
staff to learn the experience. And experiential learning is it's essential, especially for adults. And you know, my own experience in terms of working in hospitality was, and I think hospitality does it the best, and I would put Emirates in that category. And then retail does it the second best, is experiential-based learning coupled with starting with values. In other words, the first thing that you teach, if you will, the new hire, the new employee, the employee in general, is your values. Because if you get too technical, you know, you can get lost in all of those technical details. And you also might not address issues that aren't planned or foreseen. So value-based, experience-based learning is, and I don't care what industry you're in, we all can learn from hospitality, we all can learn from retail. Comment, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned something about networking, right? So like, I'm coming from Sydney right now. I was there for the past 6 months. When you come to Middle East, it's quite different as you talk about networking.
True.
So if people coming from so many nationalities in the country, so it's very difficult to network with, you know, some people. Is it? I mean, I don't know. I'm just asking this question.
Yeah, certain cultures are more open to direct networking and indirect networking. It's one of the definitions of the differences of culture, is how open you are to someone you don't know. And in many cultures, someone's not going to engage you without an introduction. In other cultures, they'll take you at face value, and you need to make an elevator pitch as to why they should listen to you at the moment. So balancing what environment you're in, meaning who you're talking to, is cultural intelligence. That's what it's called. And it's one of the skills of globalization, as all of us sort of live in this global village. If we develop this cultural intelligence, we could be in Dubai, but we could be dealing with someone from the West, someone from the East, and need to adapt to whoever you're talking to, and it may be in the same physical area, so it can vary a lot.
Yeah. Next question.
How about let's flip the last question and say, what's the worst example? You know, often we can learn from mistakes that we've made. Do you have any examples of the worst training or learning experience that comes to mind, maybe without necessarily mentioning organizations, or if you choose to, it's up to you. But
Well, I had like very few, because I really search and research and ask and look at the trainer himself or herself, or the company that's providing the training. So when I make a decision, like, you know, it's after consideration, but sometimes you go for a training where you have no choice.
true.
Okay, so the company sent you out, and I have been to a training recently. It's a paid training. I went by my own, and I went there, and to be honest with you, I had zero learning experience.
Yeah.
Zero, absolutely. Even the people who was there, mostly I know them, so there was no. Sometimes, you know, you go there and the value of the networking and the people in there, like, you know, it's worth a lot. But obviously, I went there to check what's in the market, and, like, you know, how good, or, like, you know, how far I am from what's being taught in the market. And so I would say recently this is one.
I had your example made me think of one of my own. Is many years ago I was at our annual conference in the U.S. Might have been the first time that I went, and there was a lady there who was considered one of the next experts in social media. And to her credit, this was a long time ago, so she was ahead of the curve. But I went in and sat in on this, and it was very popular. But I learned absolutely nothing, and I walked out. I've only walked out of one session in my life at our own SHRM conference, and it was hers, because you know, if I'm really being honest about it, she's at this age. She was talking to people who are older than her who didn't understand technology, and I'm the same age as her, and I understood technology, and it just, she wasn't saying anything of value to me, but to an older demographic she was. So to your point, the trainer can make, the speaker will make a lot of difference in terms of the effectiveness of training and investigating who is the instructor, who's the speaker, who's the keynote, is something all of us should do when we're investing our time. Absolutely.
Yeah, speaking of Dubai and events industry, and because it's massive industry here in the country, so there are so many people who would go as speakers while they are not really qualified to speak on that topic. And like, you know,
I think we just have to be prepared for that. You know, you go to a conference, and if we're honest, some of the speakers are there because they've sponsored the conference and they're given a speaking slot. So it's a bit of a commercial. Other people are there because they're subject matter experts or, you know, gurus, so to speak. And you're going to get a mix of both. But I think all of us hope for at least 50-50. And if it's 60-40, 70-30 in the wrong way, it's not necessarily been a good investment in our time.
Yeah.
But even if you learn a little bit, you know, that's more that you came with. That you have to always see learning as a positive experience and learning from mistakes. If I'm thinking of my example of you know, the worst training that I've seen is when, you know, there's training without any filtering of the candidates, and that happens here a lot. You know, people get sent on training, and they haven't done a needs analysis to detect whether or not the people who are going on training are appropriate for the training, are the level to benefit from the training, and or is the training of use to the organization. So training for the sake of training. The good news is that's happening less than it did in the past, but it still exists, and we see it, you know, where organizations, as SHRM, we see them, organizations send us 12, 15 people. And I wish they had just put more effort into either screening those people or maybe even making it a smaller class for the people, you know, in terms of getting benefit out of the learning experience.
Interesting. More questions? Any questions from our viewers?
Or examples of bad learning experiences?
Bad learning experiences?
I think for me, it just depends on the trainer, because he can have a lot of, as you said, technical skills, but he's so boring that I want to sleep like the whole time.
Probably monotone.
Yeah, so it depends. For me, like the worst is when the trainer is just can't engage with his
engagement
students. And he's like, he knows what he's saying, but he can't just make it interesting, and everybody, they just want the training to be over.
Yeah.
So that's the worst for me. Like when
The trainer has to love what he's training.
It's obvious, you can tell, right?
Yeah, he has to have a talent in like delivering a message. It's a talent. Like he can be good in what he's doing, but if he doesn't have that talent of teaching something or training someone,
Communication skills.
yeah,
passion.
like as you were saying, like your friend who was saying that I can train anything. My brother, he can literally. He's the same thing. He's a very good teacher. So if he can make you love something. So like he's an engineer, so he's good in math and stuff. So I used to like, you know, solve problems with me, and I hated math so much, but because he loves what he knows how to deliver a message, I was so interested. But I hated my math teacher because she was so good, but she was so boring.
Yeah.
And made just the class hell. And
well, I think the worst thing that can happen is when trainers sort of use the argument that they say, well, you need to learn this for a test. You know, that's, you know, passionless. You know, it's like Amira says on Facebook here, you know, the trainer's there to check a box and get credit that they've gone through the training, you know, going through the motions.
Yeah.
That is painful. We've all been there. We've all been there.
Just to reiterate, maybe that's an opportunity for you guys in that field, the training field. But we have, in Arabic, for instance, Arabic poetry, sorry, is very strong. And there's an identification of the person who writes the poem and the person who cites it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're two different jobs, basically, two different talents and arts.
Mm-hmm.
Training is the same thing. You need to have the subject matter expert to be able to face people from a corporate or anything to respond to the technical. But I would suggest there would be two trainers: the person who knows how to talk and the person who can respond.
It's a lot to ask one person to be both.
Yeah.
You know, really.
What do you think of the death of PowerPoint when it comes to training? Like, trainers
too many
are
words kill it.
heavily dependent on the PowerPoint, and they start kind of a reading and it's just zero engagement. What do you think
Well,
of that?
it's a skill set itself. Any compliments you use to your message is helpful. And we all know that learners have different preferences. Some are more auditory, some are more visual, some are more kinesthetic. And so there's nothing wrong with using different media to engage different people. But when the person is relying on it like a script, and that you can feel it. It's a script that they're reading, and they're not true. It's like a bad actor. And I remember on a few occasions I've done keynotes where I've gone without a PowerPoint. Presenters or organizations usually want a PowerPoint. It's a bit of a takeaway for the attendees. It's a bit of structure for the event itself. But on the times that I've gone off script, in a sense, with no PowerPoint, they like to change, and so I don't want to say that PowerPoint's bad and no one should use it. Some organizations do that. Amazon, for example, Jeff Bezos, no PowerPoints. He has a wonderful technique that is very sophisticated in terms of making business cases. He says that his team, when they're making business arguments, have to present it as a narrative. So instead of putting it into a PowerPoint with a business case and ROIs, he says, tell the story as to why we should do this. And I think that's a skill set that's going to become even more and more prominent in presentation skills and communication skills coming forward. But the challenge is, not everyone's passionate to have a narrative about every subject matter. Bezos is passionate. He built this, Amazon.com, and so when people have the passion, the narrative can be there. But one of the things I don't like is this idea that every employee has to be a high performer, every employee has to be passionate about what they do. You know what? Employment falls in a bell curve, and there's people in the middle who are there because they need a job, they want to pay the bills, they want to maybe do something else.
65%.
And so we can't treat everyone as if they're high performers and future billionaires in terms of how they learn. So it's the toolkit, and you need to use the right tools in the right situation.
Yeah. You mentioned something about death of PowerPoint, right? But recently, even in when I was studying, so what we have is they asked just to put one question on a slide, just one question and explain the answer.
Yeah.
Next slide, another question and just explain the answer. So we have nothing on the slide, but just a question which you're going to be answering.
Sure.
So it's like if we have a topic, we're discussing, like for example, medical tourism or anything, or maybe marketing, how social marketing can help making any industry to prosper. So what are questions, like if we talk about Dubai as in particular, so just questions and just explain by yourself. That then is another thing
Like bullet
which
points.
will help. Yeah, like something like bullet points.
Yeah. It's not really about the technology, it's about how you use it. And so before we, as we get closer to the end of our chat, I sort of want to get into some of the technical parts of this discussion. So the question is, how do you measure the impact of training, as an organization? So in this discussion, sometimes we've been speaking as the employee, sometimes the employer. As the employer, how do you measure the value or the impact of training?
Well, I can easily put them on a test, right? It's
Test
not a
is
test.
fine,
It's not a test on a pen and paper. The test is
Results.
get 3 days and get ready to train your colleagues on what you've been learning.
Yeah.
This is also a technique that I use sometimes with the interns here. And when we had Yusra join the team, I asked Miki to tell her how he has done it. And it was like, he was not expecting that at all, right?
One of the best ways to learn is to teach. And we, in some of our more expensive training programs, we actually coach the attendees. I hope you're going to go back to your employer and tell them what you learned.
Yeah.
And that's one way of cascading the learning through an organization.
There's a lady, she's here based in Dubai. I don't know if you ever met her. Her name is Salian de la Casa. And I really like her style of training. For one fact, which everyone in the room can, like after the training finish, you can tell what you have learned in the same language she told to anyone out there. She's like, I don't know how she do it, but every time I leave one of her sessions, I can easily tell you from A to Z what I have learned.
Yeah. I think one of the ways that a good instructor prepares people for that learning experience is they have to be so knowledgeable about what their outcomes are. What are their intended learning outcomes before they start? It shouldn't be just experiential-based learning with no defined outcomes. You know, and so it sounds like the person that you're describing knows exactly what she wants you to leave with,
yeah,
and has sort of a narrative of experience that she walks you through that makes you own the experience, but really she has been genuinely facilitating that, and it becomes an extremely valuable learning experience.
Yeah, and somehow I adapted her techniques, and I use it in till now.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this earlier when we were talking about better or worse trainers, but there is, in the theory and the, of L&D and training, there is sort of a Maslow of training, and his name is Kirkpatrick. Anyone heard of Kirkpatrick in L&D? No, we don't really have any.
L&D?
Yeah, learning and development experts will know Kirkpatrick, and he developed a model. He developed a model. There should be an action plan after the training. Yeah, Hassan, I'm going to actually kind of talk about that right now. Is Kirkpatrick developed a way of assessing training, the value of training at 4 levels. And 1 was the lowest and 4 was the highest. And level 1 was what we talked about, this emotional experience. And you say, I had a great learning experience. Well, what did you learn? Well, I can't say, but I just enjoyed it. It felt good. It's kind of like when you go to a movie. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant. And this is what organizations do when they give surveys. You go to restaurants now, hotels, and they give you a survey, right? Or often they send it to you by email, right? The next day, you stayed at our property, how was your experience? That feedback, a survey, is an emotional measurement. Level 1 in terms of the success of an experience, and learning is an experience. It's the lowest level of experience. And we do that at the end of training by giving out those surveys. How did you enjoy the training? How was the trainer? How was the facilities? It's better than nothing, but it's the lowest level of measuring the effectiveness of the training.
And the highest?
Well, let's build up to it. Level 2 is kind of what you talked about. What did you know before you started? What did you know after the experience? And you measure both. And the simplest way to do that is you give someone a test before they start training, and then you test them after. And you can see the difference.
This is what we do, actually.
Right. Pre and post. It's scientific.
And we don't tell them about the pre and post.
Smart.
Yeah.
Smart. That's really smart, because and it comes from science. It's double-blinded. If you're using the terminology of science, it's taking 2 samples, 2 tests, and altering one thing in one and not in the other, and seeing what's the different after the fact. So you do that for an individual's learning. What did you know before? What did you know after? And that difference, that change, is learning. So that's better than just measuring your emotional state, but it's still not better than, and we all know this, how often, a month later, 3 months later, we forget whatever we learned. Language is a great example. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And so level 3 in Kirkpatrick's model is about changes in behavior. Not just behavior in the short term, but behavior in the long term. So in organizations, how we measure this is usually through performance appraisals. You may have done training a month ago, 6 months ago, but the type of training that you did it impact your performance in the organization? If we were, for example, assessing your performance in terms of being a team leader, and you were a 3 out of 4 or 3 out of 5 before, has there been improvement on that competency? So level 3 in Kirkpatrick model is change in behavior. But the last part of that is that change of behavior may not actually be aligned with the organization's goals, right? So again, this could be the training for the sake of training. I study Mandarin Chinese for my own sort of benefit, but is that necessarily going to benefit my organization? I can show what I knew before I took the Mandarin Chinese. I can show what I learned after. I can show that I applied it 6 months later, but does it connect with my organization? So that's the last piece in Kirkpatrick's model, is what are the results? What are the results as it relates to the organization, not just the individual? Have you cascaded your learning throughout the organization? Is it something that only you've kept within you? So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the key is...
It's an interesting model.
It goes back to 1959, you know, and his son still continues. He was in Dubai, I think, 6 months ago, not to sell anything. You know, me, I'm not selling Kirkpatrick's model, but L&D training people who do this as a profession for, you know, training trainers or training a trainer, they'll know Kirkpatrick's model inside and out, because the key is when you're doing training, before you start, you should decide at what level are you going to measure the outcome. Level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Level 4 is the hardest. Level 1 is the easiest. The point is you should do one of those. It's part of the process of developing a training program.
Interesting. I think there's 1 minute left, and I would like to take over the last minute.
Please.
If you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So I'm wearing today a LinkedIn, and nobody probably noticed. And the reason is, can you guess why?
I didn't notice because your name was backwards. Okay, so that's my experience.
Okay. So what I'm wearing, why I'm wearing this LinkedIn? Anyone has any idea?
They paid you?
I wish.
No.
So today is the 30th birthday of LinkedIn.
Oh, I didn't.
So the 5th of May 2003.
13 years?
Yeah,
That sounds
13.
so old, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is so old now. In our time. So this is happy birthday to LinkedIn, the platform that keep connecting the world best talent for improvement and for more success and productivity. And I like, you know, today I told you earlier that LinkedIn introduced a new service. They roll it out for the states to try it because money involved in there. And then now any freelancer can apply there. Probably this is for your team as well. So they call it ProFinder, and ProFinder, it categorizes every, like, you know, whatever you think of a freelancer, just like those other freelancers platforms. Now it's available on LinkedIn, and one of the biggest advantage of having a freelancer on LinkedIn is that you don't need to go to another platform. Like, I already use LinkedIn, and I'm already connected to so many people and like potential clients on LinkedIn, my friends, my alumni, etc. And now, as a freelancer, I can also make money through their new portal, ProFinder. So
as a freelancer doing what, recruiting or many other things?
You can, like, you know, there is, I can show you that they have so many categories, starting from coaching, training, graphic design, copywriting, social media, like, you know, those, especially for startups where, like, you know, I cannot afford hiring someone, but I would like to have him or her.
You know what that's like, and I think I sent you some information on it. It's like a website called Fiverr, if anyone's ever heard of Fiverr.
Fiverr is
it's kind of like a freelancer site for selling services.
Well, there's Odesk, there's Elance, but they have a little bit complicated process.
Mm-hmm.
At Fiverr, I had a very bad experience with Fiverr myself.
Yeah.
So I believe on LinkedIn, the way they are going to do it is you pitch your, like, you know, the idea, and, like, you know, you start bidding, and then LinkedIn, as far as I understood, that LinkedIn is going to pick for you the top 5, and then you can choose whether you are, like, you know, at any of the site. It's very interesting. Go and check it out, and probably it will be available for our region very soon. There is no any signs of when we will have it in the region, but just go and try it and be exposed to it so you can be ready for that day. With this note, I would like to thank everyone.
You have a compliment from Facebook. Abu Amir is
Amira, yeah.
proud of you, Anas, and I'm thinking of making another Anasaf for you.
So Amira has been to one of my trainings. She's a very good friend of mine, and she's based in Jordan. That's why she's offering the Mansaf. Thank you, Amira. Keep the Mansaf till I visit Jordan. but I have no idea when. Thank you, everyone. It's a long weekend here, but we're really happy and thrilled for that you've joined us, and especially here in the training room, or we call it the studios of Focus Social Academy. Thank you, Brad, for suggesting the very interesting topic. And if you have any further question, you can use the hashtag of our show, HRME Chat, anytime, or any platform that we exist there. We keep an eye on the hashtag, and we get back to your question, whether we know or we don't. Next week is any ideas for next week topic?
Well, you know, I was thinking it kind of relates to what you just said about freelancers. Maybe there's some talk in social media about the gig economy. This idea that the employee is a disappearing job, and that more and more of us are going to be consultants. And so maybe we talk about the gig economy.
Interesting. And I had a call from one of the HR managers that we met at FAR conference, and I pitched to her to join HRME Chat. So we will start having a third co-host, or a guest, we may call it. And I believe next Thursday is going to be the first one.
Let's try it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We look forward to that. Enjoy your weekend, please, and we hope you had a very joyful one. Thank you.